This is Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. Hello, welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles, and this is the show where we explore the riches of our Catholic faith and how it informs our daily lives. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mark Byerly, who's got a pretty remarkable story to share. About a year ago, he dropped everything, sold everything he had, and went on a cross-country pilgrimage. So he's here to tell us all about his story. So Mark, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you.
All right, so in summer of 2013, you left your job,
Yes.
left your home, sold everything you had, and you did what?
I left on a walking pilgrimage across the continental United States in reparation for the sins of the world and for our church.
What inspired you to take this drastic course of action? Was this something that you've been thinking about for a while, or was it a sudden thing? Or
It's something that I had been thinking about for a while in some form or another. Even as long ago as perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, I had at one point considered doing it, but to be perfectly honest, at the time, my faith was not strong enough to be able to bear with this, the particular burdens of going on a pilgrimage like this. More precisely, the kind of trust that I needed to have in God's providential care. At the time, I just didn't have that yet.
now, what were you doing before you went on this pilgrimage?
As far as work goes, I was a restaurant manager. A friend of mine back at my hometown in Newark, Delaware, owned 2 restaurants, Spanish restaurants, Spanish food, tapas, and I was managing one of those restaurants.
So were you raised a Catholic, or did you come to the Catholic faith later in
I
life?
was basically raised a Catholic, yes. Family heritage is Catholic on both sides. So yes, and then I myself early on joined a seminary, and then some years later came out, and then went through a number of years where I was not practicing my faith at all. I always continued believing the faith, which was kind of the contradiction that eventually had to resolve itself. It was the plight of the world over the last number of years that started bringing me back.
Was there any issues in particular?
Just everything going on. We can mention the easiest one that's always easiest to mention, abortion, but all the life issues, all the issues connected with the family morality. For me, these are all very important, and they represent great injustices that are going on in the world. But for me, ultimately, the greatest injustice is the injustice of a God who's done so much in His love for us, and we ignore Him. We do not give Him the due attention and worship that He deserves, that He certainly merits for all the sacrifice of love that He's made for us on the cross. The God who's come into our very flesh to save us, and not just save us, but to sanctify us, to make us holy beyond anything beyond our wildest dreams. He's done all this for us, and we are more and more ignoring Him and committing great sacrileges and outrages against Him. That is the greatest injustice on the face of the earth right now. So all of these things really, this realization was there, obviously, even from my youth, which is why I went and joined a seminary at one point. But obviously I fell away for a time, but the world continued getting worse and worse, and its spiral into the depths is picking up speed every day. I was aware of this, but the intuition just suddenly fell upon me at one point that this is for real, that this is the apocalypse that we're in the midst of. We don't have to project into the future. We're right here. It is clear. the moral and spiritual decay of the world is upon us. So we don't have to project or make any stories. We don't have to exaggerate. The exaggeration is here. We're in the midst of the exaggeration.
Right, right. And there are a lot of people who don't have the same clarity of vision as you do. There are a lot of people out there who really are unaware of the crisis going on right now.
Yes.
Including Catholics.
Yes, yes. And there is perhaps where the greatest sacrilege is. When we read the Old Testament, and constantly God is calling Israel to task, and that is because Israel was his beloved. Well, the Catholic Church is his beloved now. The Catholic Church has fallen away from teaching the faith in all of its purity and force. And
when you say Catholic Church, of course, you mean the hierarchy.
I mean especially, yes. First of all,
church.
of course, the hierarchy, because they are the leaders. They have been given by God, above all, the responsibility for passing on the faith in that force and purity. So now but the laity, we are not without responsibility also. And now it seems to be the laity, for the most part, that's waking up to this and taking up the responsibility and calling the laity and the world and the bishops and priests to task for what they've been failing to do.
So things come to a head, and so you decide last year to finally just go for it. So you sell everything you have. You set out with some money. Did you have a clear plan before you set out? Did you know where you wanted to go, which shrines you wanted to visit, how long this would take?
I assumed that it was going to take close to a year. I knew that I could probably finish it if I really wanted to, and probably in about 10 months, but that it could expand to 14 months or so. And in fact, it's going to end up being just about 14 months. Within a few weeks, I'll reach the 14-month mark, and I'm going to be finishing up by that time. So,
okay. So did you have any rules, for instance, what kind of transportation you would or would not take, that sort of thing?
The mission itself, I decided, would be to go travel basically on foot to 150 different Catholic shrines across the country. The 150 representing the 150 Hail Marys of the typical 15-decade rosary. And it was, as I said, basically on foot. I could accept rides for those 150 from folks who would offer them freely at any moment, people that I'd meet along the way that would talk with me and find out what I'm doing, and at times they'd offer rides, or perhaps even just along the road. People would at times see me walking and offer me rides. So I could accept rides freely offered, but I wouldn't petition people for rides. I wouldn't, certainly not hitchhike. So otherwise I'd just keep walking. So that's for the 150 shrines, that's basically what the rules were.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have any special prayers that you prayed as you walked?
Of course, it's very Marian-centered, as all things must be. So the Rosary, also the Divine Mercy Chaplet. I think the devotion of the Divine Mercy is one that definitely speaks to our time in a very special way. I also prayed what I thought was very important. A number of other prayers as well would take place, especially when I went to the shrines. I also pray a kind of extended St. Michael exorcism that...
Is that the one originally written by Pope Leo?
I believe so, yes. This one is pages long. It's an actual exorcism, but it can be prayed by laity, taking out a couple little parts. But it's a very powerful prayer, and believing that basically this world situation and the situation in the church is one that is being driven by Satan. People speak of conspiracies. For the most part, it doesn't seem that humanity is getting together with any kind of conspiracy, any kind of much organization. There are some situations where they are, but most of the organization is in the intelligence of Satan, who is driving all of this.
Absolutely.
So that's where you can see a consistency across the board in everything that's being done to harm the church, to harm the faith, to harm the family in the world.
Yeah, I think one of the clearest proofs of the diabolical being very active in the world today is just 10 years ago, the majority of Americans disapproved of same-sex marriage. Now, almost half the states
Yes.
require, under their state constitution or federal constitution, that you must accept same-sex marriage, and it's just moving along.
Yes, and it's moving along, and as I say, it's spiraling and picking up speed daily, and yes, that's a clear indication of that intelligence that's going behind, and that is convincing people apparently without now much effort that it's kind of the prevalent the prevailing logic.
Exactly.
That people.
But it's the compassionate thing to do, to accept same-sex marriage. That you're mean if you
Yes,
oppose it.
Yes, and
hateful.
there's a kind of pseudo gospel behind all of that, a gospel that they think that they've improved upon the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ by taking certain values of the gospel and making those the only values.
Right, to the exclusion,
To the
ignoring
exclusion
of others.
of a lot of others, yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's always how the devil likes to work. So you started out with a certain amount of money, but eventually the money ran out.
Yeah.
At that point, how did you survive?
It was always part of the plan that I would do the pilgrimage basically depending on God's providential care through alms. As far as alms go, ultimately what we all need is food, water, and shelter. So I could ask for those. I could, beg for those at any time. I wouldn't ask for money. Money is, of course, on a practical level, sometimes more helpful, easier to carry, that's for sure. So that's why I wouldn't ask for that. But folks would at times, along the way, give me money as well to help with that. And so yes, I could ask for those things, but the money I wouldn't ask for.
So that must have taken radical trust in God. I mean, getting to the point where totally helpless, have no money, totally reliant on God's graces just to get through that day. That must have taken just radical faith.
Yeah, I guess the Lord can judge that. It was becoming more and more radical with me, I guess. I know that when I left, I had only about $1,800, $1,900, and that went away in less than 2 months. That was gone. Typically, I would start getting a little uneasy if I would have around $500 or slightly less than $500. And then as my pilgrimage went on, I would only start getting a little uneasy when I had 100 or even 50. So I was more and more trusting at that point. I guess that was kind of a concrete sign of how I've been improving in trust.
So how did you feel when you had zero in your pocket?
Zero happened a number of times, and it started. There would be a bit of worry, but even in those situations, at times I would start to realize that the Lord has proven Himself. His gospel is true. His promises there are true.
He took care of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you said the money ran out after about 2 months?
Yeah, the money ran out in less than 2 months, really. And then it was simply people occasionally, giving me food or giving me some pocket money I'd have, and I just keep going. And sometimes, because of the certain Catholic communities that I'd come into contact with that kind of really took me under their wing, the money would go up again, and so I'd go on my way with a bit more in my pocket, and that's just kind of the way the flow occurred. It happened a number of times where I got down to zero, and even once or twice where I got not only down to zero money but also zero food. There was a period of 4 or 5 days where I lived only on spoonfuls of peanut butter that I had left over.
Protein.
Protein. Peanut butter and a bit of honey.
Right.
And that was all I had. But I made it through. I didn't starve even in those days. So the Lord never promised that it would be luxurious and easy all the time.
Exactly.
But it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to take a very quick break. I'm Christine Niles. We're talking with Mark Byerly about his amazing cross-country pilgrimage that is coming to a close. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the interesting encounters that he's had along the way. Stay tuned. Announcing a new novel by Elena Maria Vidal, The Paradise Tree. The year is 1887 in Leeds County, Ontario. The O'Connor clan is gathering to mourn the loss of its patriarch Daniel O'Connor, an Irish immigrant. His story is one of great hardships, undying love, and persevering faith. As Daniel is laid to rest, his grandson Fergus receives a piercing insight into what his own calling in life will be. The Paradise Tree by Elena Maria Vidal, available at Amazon.com. Okay, welcome back to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles, and today we are continuing our discussion with Mark Byerly. So, Mark, I'm interested in hearing about your lodging. I know you brought a sleeping bag with you. Were there times that you actually had to sleep outdoors?
Oh, yeah. Yes, well, of course, not typically having money or a lot of it, I couldn't make use of hotels or motels very often. So I brought with me a sleeping bag, a tent from the beginning, assuming that I'd probably make use of that most often.
How did you survive in the winter months? I hope that you were in the southern regions at that time.
I was, yes.
Oh, good.
I was heading down into the Texas area and over towards New Mexico, Arizona at that time. So, yes, I had when I left, I had a tent, and I had what we could call a sleeping bag, but it was just a very thin felt one, because remember, I left at summertime, actually the Feast of St. James on July 25th of 2013. Is that right? So my sleeping bag was just this very thin felt thing that, because the heat was oppressive at that time, so I didn't need to, not wanting to carry more weight than I had to. So once the winter did come along, that was insufficient. But I got into the winter where I only had that, not having the money to purchase one. I had to kind of make do just with that. And there were a number of situations where the nights were so cold and that sleeping bag was just not sufficient that I just could not sleep anywhere close to what I needed. So I had to get up in the middle of the night and walk and stamp my feet and, so.
Last winter was a pretty brutal winter, at least up in the Midwest.
Yes. And I really was not, providentially, I was not hit by anything very bad. Just within the week or 8 or 10 days, I think it was, after leaving Dallas, heading south towards San Antonio, that's when the big ice storm hit, even in Dallas, and just crippled the city.
And you had just left.
I had just left a little before that. So
Thank you, Jesus.
dipped down, yes, I dipped down below that. When I was in San Antonio, they got a little bit of a cold burst there, but relatively speaking, it wasn't so bad. So I really was avoiding most of all those problems. Right. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear about people's reaction to you. How have people reacted to you?
It's been a mixed bag, of course. We have reactions of folks who aren't Catholic at all, who aren't religious at all, and then even within my brothers and sisters in the Catholic faith, there's been a range of reactions. So I could probably give a couple examples that give a sense of the range. I was once thrown out of a church, a Catholic church, that I visited.
Why?
To be perfectly honest, I don't know why to this day.
Were you there just praying?
I was there. It was a church of perpetual adoration, and I had been there the one day. I count perpetual adoration shrines as perpetual adoration churches as shrines for the purposes of my pilgrimage. So this was a perpetual adoration church, and I was there one day praying for about 3 hours. They let me in, seemingly a bit begrudgingly, but they allowed me in. They were locked up. So I prayed there and then left and planned to go to Mass the next morning there, which I did. I showed up there about 45 minutes before Mass to be able to pray and whatnot. So I was praying in the adoration chapel, and then when I came out to go into Mass, there was a woman standing there with a police officer, and the police officer asked her, "Is that him, ma'am?" And she said yes, and she walked into Mass. And then as I approached, the officer said, "Sir, excuse me, is that your bag?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Would you please take that and come with me?" And so I went with him, and he said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to have to remove you from the premises. If you return, I'll have to arrest you."
Oh, goodness.
I had no explanation really, other than the woman there decided that she didn't like the looks of me. That's all they have to do. Just call the local police, and that's all the reason that they need to have. So I never
That's
was able
unfortunate.
to, the woman herself I never met.
So you didn't even get to go to Mass?
I didn't even get to
Wow.
go to Mass that day, no. So that was discouraging for me that day, and it affected me the next number of days, of course. But then, I receive the other extreme of treatment. Sometimes I had the practice of trying to send ahead of myself an email saying who I was and what I was doing so that people would be prepared, partially to help try to avoid things like that last experience. So at one college, I went to Thomas Aquinas College in California. I was going to count this as a shrine. I'm doing that with a couple of colleges because of what they represent for what Catholic education and orthodoxy in education needs to be. So I sent ahead to them, notice of who I am and what I was doing. And when I got there, they had a big plaque there with framed and sitting on an easel with my name on it saying, "Welcome to Mark Byerly." And, and they had a whole welcoming kind of committee there.
Fantastic.
And they brought me around everything. They gave me lodging there for a couple of
God
nights.
Bless them.
And so you could kind of sense the kind of Catholicism that they lived simply by their reaction to what a pilgrim is.
Right.
So that's kind of the range of,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
so
that's
I
beautiful.
received everything in between as well.
Now, begging for food, that must have been a pretty humbling experience. I'm sure that there must have been some people who just thought, he's just some homeless guy, some beggar, probably didn't pay any attention to you.
Yeah, well, my asking for food would typically take places at churches, at Catholic churches.
Okay.
I would always and only ask from Catholic churches.
Gotcha.
But truth be said too,
But I imagine people seeing you sleeping outside must have probably just thought, he's just some bum on the street.
I basically was a bum on the street. So, you couldn't fault them necessarily for that. I was homeless. My home was...
For a good cause.
Yes, and of course they didn't know all the details, but truth be told, I looked and smelled like a bum. Because, there were times when I had to go almost, 3 weeks at times without a bath or shower. It didn't happen that often that it went that long, but occasionally it did. And so I had to look for places where I could try to bathe, bathrooms that typically, again, in churches where I would go for Mass, and I would find that they had a bathroom there, and so I could go in and lock the door and use the sink to bathe myself as best I could. Sometimes I had money, I could go to a laundromat and wash my clothes.
Were there any, outside of Catholic churches, things like that, were there any people who opened up their homes to you? Or?
Yes, I received help from outside of Catholic churches, sometimes from Protestant brothers and sisters. They were sometimes some of the most forthcoming in their enthusiasm too for what I was doing. And I've struck up some friendship with a couple of them.
Oh, good.
One in particular that I keep in contact with on a regular basis. He's always trying to find out where I am and attempting to wanting to send money to me.
Oh, good.
So you received help as well from
Right.
from them, and I was glad to receive it.
What would you say is the main way that this pilgrimage has changed you? Because I imagine it's probably been pretty life-changing.
Right. Well, of course, I knew from the beginning that I would have to grow in trust in God. That was something that I knew I owed to God. And so I was using this as a means to do that, and that was something that our Lord wanted of me. So that was the principal change that was, coming over me over time, that growing trust and abandonment. And it kind of is extending, seeing that He was taking care of me personally, this little dot on the map of the world wandering.
For whom His Son died.
Yes. It also has caused my trust to grow in that He also wants to take such care of His church and of the world situation. Mm-hmm. His power is sufficient to do that as well.
Right.
And His efforts are constant.
Yeah.
And so my trust in that aspect of it has also grown by extension.
I imagine you have an insight into the ways of God in a way that probably very few people have, just because you have had to so radically abandon yourself to His care, and He's come through. He's taken care of you.
Yes.
It's a great gift too when God brings you to that point. It's terrifying when He does bring you to that point because you're scared, but then He takes you to the point where you have to abandon yourself radically to God, and then He shows you that He takes care of you.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's just this peace that comes over you that is like nothing in the world.
Yes, and it's humbling too, because you see that every step of the way of divine pedagogy, that we're always giving Him what He's asking or trying to, sometimes giving Him a little bit more, but we're also growing in the consciousness of the fact that there's a lot that I'm still not giving Him, but he's being patient. He's accepting that slowness of learning. But the greatest saints are those who come to a point, the greater saints earlier, where they simply give it all, absolutely. But, there's the whole history of the Church of many saints that also learned slowly.
Right.
And I'm one of those. And but hopefully learning to abandon myself more drastically, to give more than I feel that I have to give. That's kind of the way the pedagogy goes. We give what we have to give, what we seem to be forced into. Mm-hmm. The whole dynamism of generosity is that we should give God above all, more than what we're forced into.
Right, because that's how He is towards us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you are in your last leg of this journey. You're in Detroit now. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, you're going to be heading to Massachusetts. What do you plan on doing with your life once your pilgrimage is over?
I've decided that there's no reason for me to stop this kind of living of the faith. It wouldn't make any sense. The world situation is basically continuing as is. I unfortunately have not been able to put a major dent into the world situation by what I've
You've probably gained an abundance of graces that you don't even know about until you reach heaven. So.
Yes, hopefully, and had some effect on other souls as well. I know that I have. But as I say, the situation continues mostly the same. So it doesn't make any sense for me to go back to a life in the world where I'm not fighting exclusively for these purposes. So I've decided that I'm going to go into the desert of the Midwest as a hermit to continue a life of prayer and contemplation, of penance for the world, for the church.
Wonderful. And then you'll be able to receive the sacraments out there?
I will be in a place where providentially God has supplied me with a priest who is also there living as a hermit in the contemplative life. So because of that, yes, I'll be able to receive regularly, daily, the sacraments.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a pretty remarkable story. I pray that God raises up more souls with such conviction as yours.
Yes, I do as well. There have to be many more. There have to be. And I know that God is pouring down the graces from heaven for that. The saints that have to save this situation are here now. They have to be here. because the situation is deteriorating too quickly. The saints that have to respond to pull the plane up, they have to be here, but they have to now respond to those graces that are being poured out. Generosity. There are souls out there who will be able to respond more dramatically than I have to those graces.
Yeah.
And they need to do that.
Yeah. And it
because
takes
the church,
courage too.
Yes. The church needs them
Yeah.
dramatically right now.
Absolutely.
So.
All right. Well, Mark, God bless you and the rest of your
Thank you.
travels. I hope that you'll keep us in prayer.
Thank you,
And
Christine.
you start your new
Definitely.
life out there and as a hermit. So thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
right.
God bless.
All right, you have been watching Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. Keep fighting the good fight of the faith, my friends. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly. God bless you.